Alright, hopefully you can see that lovely illustration. That beautiful engraving there is our next essay, Use of Elephants in War. Hopefully you can get a nice view of that. This is a rather long essay, and I'm afraid it's going to be another one that's going to upset me a little bit. The content of this, I'm sure, isn't going to be pretty. But you know what? I'm just going to take it in the spirit in which it was written. This was 1865, after all. And, you know, this is what they saw, and this is what they wrote about. Okay, so here we are reading American Miscellany. This is just a collection of essays, I guess scientific and historic. And, you know, it's been quite random. But let's get into it. We just had an interesting essay about the hammer. We are now on page 115 of American Miscellany, and our subject is Ancient Use of Elephants in War. The military history of elephants commences with the invasion of India by Alexander the Great. The battle fought by Porus is the first well-authenticated account of their use in war. Thenceforward we find them used by the successors of Alexander, particularly the Ptolemies and the Seleucidae. Antipater introduced them into Greece, and Pyrrhus transported them into Italy. The elephants used by these princes were of the Asiatic race, Elephas indicus of Cuvier, but the Carthaginians and Numidians, about the commencement of the Punic Wars, began to make a similar use of the African elephants, Elephas capensis of Cuvier, which differs from the other by having less size, weight, and strength, but longer ears and tusks. What may be called the military qualifications of the elephant are his size, his strength, his docility, his power of swimming, and the toughness of his hide, which in most places was impenetrable to the weapons of ancient warfare. It must, however, be observed that the strength of the elephant, though great, is not at all proportionate to his magnitude. The ordinary pictures of ancient battles, in which elephants are represented bearing huge towers crowded with armed men, are ludicrous exaggerations. The most that the animal could carry is a houdah with from 4 to 6 persons, and even this weight could not be sustained on a long march. The houdah was expressed by a Greek word which literally signifies a little cuirass, but is sometimes used by military writers for the hurdles or wicker work employed in the construction of field works. The passage of Silius Italicus, which has led to the exaggerated notion of these towers, is merely descriptive of the excessive alarm which would be excited in an army seeing such a spectacle for the first time. High on his back the soldiers saw amazed embattled towers and threatening forts upraised. The pinnacles, ascending to the clouds, shake as he moves and threat to crush the crowds. That little poem there, that little quatrain, was written by Punicus, I.X. Or Punica I.X. Punica the Ninth, I don't know. This is just such an exaggeration as we find in the Hindu poem translated by Wilkins in the Asiatic Researches. His elephants moved like walking mountains, and the earth, oppressed by their weight, crumbled into dust. M. Armandi, in his work on the military history of elephants, to which we are indebted for much of the information contained in this article, justly remarks that elephants and war chariots were used in ancient warfare for purposes analogous to parks of artillery in modern times. In the Battle of the Hydaspes, Porus employed his elephants to cover his center and left wing, believing that his right was sufficiently protected by the river. According to Polyaenus, he committed the fatal error of placing his elephants so close together that they prevented him from making any change in his lines. Consequently, when Caenus charged through his right wing and attacked his center in flank and rear, the Indians, kept back by the elephants in the front and pressed hard by Caenus in the rear, became a helpless mass of confusion. Porus tried to remedy this disaster by ordering his elephants to charge the phalanx which formed the Macedonian center, but the Greeks, having room to maneuver, attacked each elephant with a separate detachment of light troops. Alexander having selected picked men armed with sharp axes and crooked swords for the purpose, who were taught to aim at the trunks and throats of the elephants. The animals were finally driven back, and thus any new formation of the Indian lines was effectually prevented. In this instance, then, it may be said that these cumbrous animals caused the defeat of the Indian army by rendering its lines immovable after they had been once formed. Elephants, being used as a covering force, were usually stationed in the front of these lines, the intervals between them being occupied by divisions of light troops, who had to prevent the enemy from turning the elephants back upon their own ranks. Some leaders were so much afraid of these elephants being turned that they kept these animals in reserve, and only brought them up to turn the doubtful scale of victory. It was thus that Pyrrhus won the battle of Heraclea. The Roman cavalry were cutting lanes through his columns when he brought up the elephants. The Latin horses were more frightened than their riders at the unusual sight. The squadrons fell back on the legions and threw them into disorder. Pyrrhus seized the decisive moment to charge at the head of his Thessalian cavalry, and the red field was won. A curious circumstance corroborates the assertion of Florus that elephants were previously unknown to the Romans. They called the animals Lucanian oxen, the battle having been fought in Lucania, and this was the name usually given to the elephant by Latin writers, down to the Augustan age. The Battle of Esculum was remarkable for two circumstances which have been omitted by nearly all the modern writers of Roman history. The legionaries had so far recovered from their fear of elephants that a centurion named Minucius attacked one of these beasts single-handedly and cut off a large portion of his trunk. The second incident is that the Romans borrowed war chariots from the Gauls as a counterpoise to the elephants of Pyrrhus, but never used them except in this battle. Minucius was not the only hero who ventured singly against an elephant. A more noble instance of devoted heroism is recorded in the history of the Maccabees at the Battle of Beth-Zacharias. Eleazar, surnamed Savaran, perceiving that one of the beasts, armed with royal harness, was higher than the rest, and supposing that the king was upon him, put himself in jeopardy, to the end that he might deliver his people and get him a perpetual name. Wherefore he ran upon him courageously through the midst of the battle, slaying on the right hand and on the left, so that they were divided from him on both sides, which done he crept under the elephant and thrust him under and slew him, whereupon the elephant fell down upon him, and there he died. Thank you. First Maccabees 6, 43 to 46. I guess that's First Maccabees chapter 6, verse 43 to 46. On this narrative, it may be remarked that the words rendered royal harness properly signifies a royal huda, that the 32 men said in a preceding verse to be united with the mahut in the charge of each elephant include not only the warriors in the tower, but also the soldiers who had the charge of protecting the unwieldy animals from the skirmishes and light troops of the enemy. Pyrrhus was indebted to his elephants for his victory at Heraclea, but these same animals caused his utter ruin in the Battle of Beneventum. Curius Dentatus had trained a body of archers to shower burning arrows on these animals. I guess that's his name, Curius Dentatus. Curius Dentatus had trained a body of archers to shower burning arrows on these animals, which, sticking in their flesh, burned through their thick skins and drove them mad with pain. No animal is more ferociously destructive than an infuriated elephant. Even in the domesticated state, they are known to be gratified with carnage, and hence they have been frequently employed as executioners by the despots of the East. We do have another picture to look at, if you can see that. There's an engraving. It's called Elephants Destroying Captives Taken in War. Probably don't need to see that, but there it is. One of the Epirote elephants, furious from pain, shook off his driver, and rushing back upon the phalanx which Pyrrhus had formed with closer ranks than usual, crushed and destroyed a great number of soldiers before any remedy could be found for such a disaster. On a previous occasion, the delight of the elephant in carnage had been fearfully demonstrated. Before the body of Alexander was laid in the tomb, 300 of his bravest companions were crushed to death by elephants in the presence of the entire army by command of the regent Perdiccas. Arrian says that this sickening massacre was rendered the more revolting by the trumpeting, roaring, and other signs of savage delight which the animals exhibited while engaged in the work of slaughter. The military value of the elephants was best tested in the Second Punic War. Hannibal attached more importance to these animals than any contemporary general, and he certainly made a more skillful use of them than any great captain of antiquity. At the battle near the river Trebia, Hannibal charged and routed the Roman cavalry with his elephants, but the infantry stood firm against these animals and even drove them back on the Carthaginian lines. We are told that the legionaries were encouraged to this resistance by the example of Fibrenius. The incident is well told by Silius Italicus, and as this most prosaic of historical poets is rarely read by English students, we shall venture to translate the passage. Excellent. A little bit of poetry. Okay. Fresh horrors now are added to the fight. The fearful elephants appear in sight. They gain the bank, they rush into the stream. High o'er the wave, their spear-fenced turrets gleam. The Trebia trembles at the sudden shock, as if invaded by some monstrous rock, which, torn by tempest from some mountain's head, choked up the stream and drove it from its bed. But valor rises under adverse fate, and dangers still excite the truly great. Fibrenus, only anxious that his name should live recorded in the rolls of fame, shouts, "Thank thee, fortune, underneath the wave, my deeds are seen." Shouts, "Thank thee, fortune, underneath the wave, thou didst not give me an unhonored grave. My deeds are seen, and here on land I try what force the Roman falchion can defy, or what the monster is that must not fear the Latin javelin and Tuscan spear. He spoke and eager sought some tender part, then at the monster hurled his rapid dart. Right to the eye the weapon held its way, tore through the ball, and quenched the visual ray. The horrid beast sent forth a fearful roar, which echoed wildly round the blood-stained shore. Then, blind with rage and maddened by the pain, he threw his driver helpless on the plain and fled amain. The Romans at that sight receive fresh courage and renew the fight. They press the monster with incessant blows. From gaping wounds his blood in torrents flows. Arrows and darts are quivering in his hide, till one wide gush extends along his side. A bustling forest on his back appears, of waving javelins and of deep-driven spears. Worn out at last, the dreadful monster reels, and seeks the river as his death he feels. He falls, the mighty ruin chokes the flood, and the clear stream runs crimson with his blood. That's by Punica. And there's that IV, Punica the Fourth notation. According to Polybius, whose authority is incidentally confirmed by Juvenal, Hannibal lost all his elephants but one on this battle, and did not receive a fresh supply until after his victory at Cannes. Hanno joined him at Capua with 40 elephants and 4,000 Numidian cavalry, but this reinforcement did not enable Hannibal to pursue his career of conquest. He was defeated at Nola by Marcellus with a loss of 4 elephants killed and 2 taken. He met a similar loss at Grumentum. 2 of his elephants were killed in the unsuccessful attempt to relieve Capua, and 5 more were slain at the Battle of Camisium. At the Battle of the Metaurus, the elephants were repulsed by the pikemen of the 11th Legion, 4 being slain on the spot, and the rest driven back on the Carthaginian lines. But the most remarkable example which can be cited of the use of elephants during this period was presented at the Battle of Zama, where Hannibal covered his line with no less than 80 of these animals. Scipio immediately changed the usual orders of Roman lines. He left wide spaces like lanes between the manipuli of the legions, masking this arrangement by throwing forward a cloud of skirmishers and light troops, principally Numidian cavalry furnished to them by Massinissa, furnished to them by Massinissa. Hannibal, annoyed by the skirmishers, ordered the elephants to charge the Roman lines in a body, and the skirmishers retreated through the lanes or passages left open by the formation of the legionaries. The elephants pursued, and the moment one of these animals was engaged in one of the passages, his doom was sealed. On either side were the pikemen, whose serried weapons could not be beaten down, while the light troops attacked the animals with spears, javelins, crooked swords, and battle axes. The chief danger arose from the cavalry. The Italian horses could not be got to face the elephants. Scipio, however, promptly set the example of dismounting, and after a fierce struggle, the elephants were all hors de combat. 11 of these animals were taken alive by the Romans. All the rest fell in action. This battle taught the Romans of the advantage of an open formation of the lines in a contest with elephants. and in some degree proved the inutility of these animals when sent against disciplined troops. Thenceforth, the use of these animals in war declined, and they are mentioned for the last time in the military history of Rome at the Battle of Thapsus, where Julius Caesar overthrew the last army of the Republic and its African auxiliaries. All the accounts of this battle which we possess are so imperfect that it is not easy to determine how Juba, maybe it's Juba, that it is not easy to determine how Juba employed his elephants, but that the victory over them was deemed very important is manifest from the frequent appearance of the elephant on the coins and medals of the Julian family. The neglect of elephants in the Western world after the Battle of Thapsus became an established principle. Both Livy and Arrian speak of them as utterly contemptible for the purposes of war, but in the East the use of them was revived by the princes of the House of Assassin, and they were employed in the wars of India so late as 1779. Hyder Ali, having sent his elephants to charge the disordered lines of the unfortunate Bailey. In the Eastern wars, not less than in those of the West, elephants have proved an uncertain and dangerous support. Thus, when the Portuguese were attacked at Colombo in 1520, the elephants sent in against them by the Cingalese, daunted by the fire of the harquebuses and maddened by wounds, turned back upon their own lines and crushed to death whole troops of unfortunate islanders. Some of the emperors of Delhi mounted light guns on the backs of elephants, but the slow movements of the animals prevented this kind of artillery from being generally adopted. In our day, elephants are chiefly used for the transport of ordnance and heavy stores, and many are of opinion that even for this purpose they are inferior in value to horses.